At the very outset, I would like to thank the mover of the motion, the special motion, Sri George B. Lingdo, Honorable Member from Umroi, for tabling this very important special motion. And the irony is that we are having this discussion after MOU with the counterpart in respect of this very contentious issue has been signed. And only one day before, the Chief Minister of the state will be having a meeting with the counterpart and Government of India. So it's quite a catch-22 kind of situation for the people of the state. And it gives us a reason to believe that the decision has been made, and all this discussion that we'll be having will be more like ritual. It's quite disturbing because we are talking about a contentious issue. The contentious issue of resolving the areas of difference with our counterpart along the Assam-Meghalaya interstate border. Contentious. We will have different opinions on our approach to resolving this. This is precisely the reason why we need discussion, why we need to understand the complexities associated with this kind of contentious issues before trying to even arrive at a decision. Now, a question of resolving the areas of difference with Assam in respect of 2,729 plus square kilometer areas. Now, well, the government, after government has worked on the possibilities of arriving at a resolution, and they are all available on records. The office has the access to all the records, the parameters, the principles based on which we must move forward to find answers to resolve this contentious issue. Now, it's a question of approach, give and take. Give and take means we want to arrive at a situation where both the parties agree, because we give somewhere and we take somewhere. Now, the idea of understanding the complexity of a formula pertaining to this give and take has to be probably understood based on the subject that we are dealing with. We're talking about more than 1,500 square kilometers of Block 1 and Block 2 area, where we have more problem, and the background and the historical background which revolves around that, and the parameters and principles which were mutually agreed to have been laid down in order to look at how things can be mutually acceptable. When you keep these areas unresolved for longer time, the next move to resolve the pending areas of difference will be more difficult. That was one of the reasons why we didn't want to take it in piecemeal. It is not a fact that this idea of coming to a resolution by taking part by part in respect of these 12 areas of difference was never discussed. It was discussed. It was discussed, but we knew once we resolve certain areas, the most difficult areas, particularly Block 1 and Block 2, and the Langpi, whether there be possibilities of having such kind of mutually agreed terms and conditions. The more we delay on these areas, the more complex and more difficult it will become for us, and that is the fact of the matter. Mr. Speaker, sir. And that is precisely the reason why we took a conscious decision that we don't want to proceed in a piecemeal manner, patchwork. Now, the government, in its own wisdom, thought it's appropriate. But we will leave behind those areas which are not part of this resolution as areas of difference where it will be very, very difficult to agree to the similar kind of understanding, similar kind of formula. We explored what can be the ultimate fallout if we take up part by part and resolve issues in part by part manner. Mr. Speaker, sir, Block 1, Block 2 area where we have substantial number of our own people residing. And the background of number of discussions are available. That's why it should have alerted the government of the day as to what happens to them in the years to come when we take up these issues separately. Since 1951, after these areas which were part of the erstwhile United Khasi Gianthial District was carved out to create that United Mikir and North Kachar District, this has been an issue. It was also, that's why when we talk about the historical background and the principles adopted, then historical backgrounds are very clear. This was part and parcel of the United Khasi Gianthial District. And when the movement for the statehood was on, it was expected that that part would be part and parcel of the newly created state of Meghalaya. But for whatever reasons, best known to Government of India, at that point of time, this was not part of the newly created state of Meghalaya. And ever since then, we have been trying hard. We, the people of Meghalaya. And when we talk about the consent of people, it's a very tricky. When you're saying the parameters, the principle laid down, historical background, consent of the people, which people's consent, which people's will we are talking about, the will of the people. Now, for example, the mover of the special motion has elaborately underlined those important aspects which gives us an insight into what exactly will be on the ground zero, particularly in those areas where you have higher density of population, and particularly areas which is contiguous with the state capital of Assam. How do you quantify the value? And if you're looking at the will of the people, when I go through the proceeding of all those exercises which was adopted by the government, we see that they're referring to the will of the people who owns the land. Now, who owns the land? The private landowners. But we are talking about state's border. We are not talking about somebody's land. We are not talking about one individual person's land. We are talking about the land of the state of Meghalaya. A small point, maybe a 2-acre or 3-acre of land in a prime commercial area, is the potentiality of being a source of huge revenue. We're talking about areas which are in the main frontage. When somebody buys a land, they always look at the frontage. The whole valuation of land is determined by the frontage. And today we are talking about a land which is known by everybody in the Northeast that belongs to Meghalaya. That belongs to Meghalaya, and that is within the administrative control of Meghalaya. You're talking about areas which was not earlier encroached upon, nor new settlements were allowed. Unfortunately, after we decided that there should be no more new settlement in our bilateral meeting with our counterpart in 2010, we made it a kind of a responsibility upon the government that, yes, that must be implemented in letter and spirit. Besides allowing any developmental works to be jointly taken up or taken up in consultation with the counterpart, no new settlement should be allowed. And whenever there was a reported new settlement, then we took up bilaterally. And that was taken up at the level of the district administration and at the most at the level of the chief secretary level. Discussion, talk over phone, and then resolution. But in the immediate recent past, which is seen by everybody, we closed our eyes. We allowed Assam to engage in new settlement. And now, when we come to adopting these principles, we say, will of the people. It's very complex. When we talk about the will of the people, the landowners, and in those areas, you cannot rule out owner of the land who may be actually an agent of Benami ownership of land also. There are a number of land which are probably in tribal's name, but the whole assets are being utilized by people from the other side of the interstate border. And therefore, the serious understanding about the will of the people must be understood from that perspective. And areas like Maikuli and all, there will be no problem whatsoever in respect of the demarcation and identity, though there was a claim and counterclaim. Because based on all this historical background, ethnicity, will of people, all these parameters that the government then submitted our claim in 2011. The whole discussion revolves around this claim that has been submitted by the state of Meghalaya, by the government of Meghalaya in 2011. Every areas of difference with complete records to indicate the authenticity of our claim from the perspective of the principles that they have adopted. Historical, contiguity, will of people, convenience of administration, these 5 agreed principles. On the basis of that only, this claim that we submitted to the government of Assam in 2011. Now, therefore, if it is a question of give and take, now it becomes very easy. Okay, this one, ethnicity, mixed ethnicity, so give it to Assam. Particular area, 100% of the population, other than the indigenous ethnic community, give it to Assam. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to understand from the perspective of the very provision of the Constitution, which provides us a weapon to protect our land from alienation from the ownership of the land to other communities, particularly people belonging to non-tribal. Now, therefore, people who belong to non-indigenous community, if you go by their will, what can be anticipated? It is a common sense. It is a common sense. If any land in the interstate border, the ownership of which is vested upon non-Khasi, non-Garo, non-Jaintia, what will be the will, likely will of the person concerned? Keeping in mind various laws, constitutional provisions which protect our land from alienation to other people. They will not be able to sell it to anybody other than the tribals. It is known. Therefore, many land which earlier belonged to non-tribals have got transferred to Khasis, Garos, and Jaintias and tribals. Whether it is in Shillong, whether it is in Garo Hills, whether it is in Assam Meghalaya border along Gwalpara district. In my own earlier constituency, Ampati, all the land that borders Assam, because we were in undivided Assam then. So most of those land belong to non-tribals. But after we achieved our statehood, what happened? Because of the Land Transfer Act, this land could not be sold to non-tribals anymore. So any time when the land is sold, the buyers were our Garos, our tribals. And that's how the land came back to our people. This is the reality. Now, it is precisely because of this reason why we should have the apprehension to anticipate that if you take the will of those people, the landowners, you will have different will coming from different people based on their ethnicity, based on their ethnic background. And we are talking about areas which is just in the vicinity of the state capital of Assam, the high-valued real estate area. And under the circumstances, I find no reason as to why these areas which are under the administrative control of the state of Meghalaya should be the areas which the government is so willingly giving in the name of give and take. That's why I said give and take should have been when we need to resolve those areas which is going to be more difficult to arrive at mutually agreed terms and conditions. Strategy, the tactical strategy. Sometimes we don't decide on one particular issue because we want to resolve other bigger issue. That is the approach that we adopted. But this government wanted to show that, okay, they can resolve issues. The resolving of issues in those areas by saying give and take. Give and take is when you will have to decide upon areas which is going to be more difficult to resolve from the perspective of agreeing mutually in the terms and conditions that we have always spoke of. I have a word of caution, because if we go by that parameter, in those areas, the larger areas where we are talking about more than 1,500 square kilometer area pertaining to Block 1 and Block 2, and Kanduli and CR area where you have 12.8 plus 64 square kilometer. And we have other area, Langpi, almost 300 square kilometer. There will be problem which we are witnessing in much more aggravated manner, that the existing demography from ethnic perspective will change. We cannot rule out the deliberate attempt of our counterpart to change the demography, to change the course of negotiation, and to see that we ultimately land up standing in a weaker wicket when we want to resolve those issues. Therefore, this whole approach is going to be disastrous for the future of the state in as far as our resolve to resolve the problem of this interested border problem. We'll have more problem, we'll have to compromise more in future, and it will be because we all thought, okay, everything is fine since it pertains to the land of only few people. It pertains to only few square kilometers, but a precedence which is going to put us in much more weaker wicket is not something which the people of the state want. When we talk about the will of the people, talking about the will of the people, not will of the landowners. Those small few landowners who do not even belong to our ethnic group in as far as the indigenous ethnic communities are concerned. Therefore, they will have different preference. They are bound to have, therefore, a will which will indicate contrary to what we expect, what we desire. As appropriately pointed out by the mover of this special motion, it is not the time when we can dwell upon this issue for a very long time, understanding well that it's only in the form of a special motion. It should have been rather in the form of exhaustive engagement amongst the political parties. It should have been rather in the form of exhaustive engagement with the stakeholders, meaning the people who represent the interests of the people of the state, not just those landowners. And even when we are talking about the landowners, I'm talking about the landowners who do not belong to the indigenous ethnic groups of our state. I keep on receiving phone calls. Even yesterday I was receiving a phone call that are we being forced to go to Assam? These are the words coming from our Garos and our ethnic communities belonging to our indigenous ethnic communities. Therefore, it is not something which this House can agree, irrespective of whether we belong to the ruling or opposition. I think I have made it abundantly clear, otherwise it would become difficult to resolve the remaining pending areas which are larger in area. 1,500 plus square kilometer only in respect of Block 1 and Block 2. And there is a bigger problem, lumpy, bigger problem. Kanduli and Sir, and the problem gets more and more aggravated. Mr. Chairman, sir, I would like to urge upon our members from this August House, therefore, not to look at from the perspective of who is in the government and who is not in the government. Look into the complexity of the problem from the perspective of the complexity that we will be confronted by in the days to come. By taking these parameters that we resolve these contentious, long-pending contentious issue part by part, which will result in putting us in a much more weaker position, and they will be in a stronger wicket when we deal. We must be able to decide, discuss, engage from position of strength. When we engage in discussing to resolve such issues, what is the main strategy that we should adopt? We should adopt that we prepare ourselves to be able to engage with the counterpart from position of strength. The moment you resolve this issue in parts, we will not be able to engage with them from position of strength in future. Because Assam, well, with no offense indented, we have to understand. We have to also understand the ramification of the Northeastern Reorganization Act 1971, how this was interpreted And in fact, the interpretation of the Northeastern Reorganization Act 1971 and the demarcation of the interstate border by Survey of India was the main reason of this contentious issue having eluded us from resolution. I tried to understand that time what was the reason why the Survey of India could demarcate the interstate border in such a manner which was not acceptable to state of Meghalaya. What has gone wrong? What was the reason? Who were those people who did the demarcation? Is it not a fact that when demarcation is met, for any boundary, whether it is a private property, both the landowners will be called before demarcation is met? That was not the case, Mr. Chairman, sir, at that point of time. This is based on our exhaustive due diligence. Fortunately or unfortunately, coincidentally, those days, look at the Survey of India, people who were manning Survey of India, how many people who belong to our indigenous ethnic communities were in Survey of India. Therefore, how the natural boundaries were interpreted in a manner that resulted in this contentious controversy, contentious disagreement in respect of accepting the border which was demarcated by Survey of India. All this Chandrachud Commission and other reports are based on those things. This is precisely the reason why we had to do lots of homework and submit that whole bulky records that was so exhaustively prepared to substantiate and strengthen our claim over those lands. And if you look at one by one of those areas of difference, part of claim of Meghalaya, yes, because these were done so diligently. By correct interpretation of various notifications from 19th century, and people were forthcoming in helping the government then to give us more and more support by sharing the documents that were available, the documents which were notified during the British time, and based on which we gave exhaustive explanation indicating that the authentic boundaries which should have been interpreted as per the notification should have been this, and not the one which was indicated by Survey of India. And that is precisely the reason why we say that it took time, because there was nothing ready-made with the government then, 2010. But we did not take much time. We took less than 2 years to come up with that whole comprehensive record to indicate our claim with all necessary justifications to strengthen our claim in respect of these whole areas of difference. In respect of Block 1 and Block 2, and then Kanduli, Siar, which covers large area, we cannot leave them in silo for negotiation and discussion with Assam. The moment we take up these areas in silos, then we will not be able to negotiate with Assam from position of strength. That's why I would like to appeal to this government, Mr. Chairman, sir. Hold on, have patience. Hold on, have patience. I know the urgency must be because the counterpart is pushing. Because under the circumstances, our counterparts stand to gain. And the counterpart will be in a position, in a stronger position. They will be in a position of strength to discuss with us, to resolve the remaining areas of difference. And it will go on eluding us and eluding us. Please mind my work, Mr. Chairman. Therefore, hold on. And if you want to have further discussion, we can have discussion. But if you are in a hurry, I'd like to caution the government. Please don't be in a hurry. Take note of this caution that we want to resolve areas of difference with Assam in respect of those areas where it is more complex, which will be important for us. Because if you look at demography as the criteria, the ethnicity, the will of the people, the same parameters will ultimately be probably insisted upon by the counterpart in respect of Block 1 and Block 2. There, please remember that the counterpart has been aggressively trying to create new settlement after settlement, bringing in other ethnic people belonging to other ethnic communities to make our Khasi Phanar community minority there in most of the villages. And this is happening on a regular basis. And we will be in euphoria after these 6 areas of difference is resolved, and we will be sleeping like we did post-1972. I'm sure it will generate that sense of euphoria if I'm speaking from human psychology perspective, in as far as those people who agree to go ahead with this proposal. With these few words, Mr. Chairman, sir, I would like to again appeal to the government. Hold on. Have more exhaustive understanding about this complex, contentious issue before you decide to resolve this contentious issue part by part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir.